Just recently, I saw some headlines that were talking about the war, and you, since you are a veteran, when you're looking at the buildup that we're looking at towards a global conflict, and this looks like it could be ground and everything else, and they're even throwing in rhetoric about a limited nuclear war. What are some of your thoughts about the rhetoric that you're hearing from the State Department, from where you used to work, and from some people probably that you even know formally? What is your thought? Like, what's going on, and why are they trying to normalize nuclear war like that? That's just, it's absurd, actually.
It's madness, and it will lead to our extinction. A friend of mine says we're perpetually in 2020. We could be dead from climate change in 20 years, or we can be dead from nuclear war in 20 minutes. And the arrogance. Look, I saw this. I saw this with the military, the State Department, with CIA guys. The arrogance that somehow, even though the wars we were taking part in Iraq and Afghanistan, later in Syria and Yemen and Libya, when historical examples we put in front of them, saying like, look, it didn't work then. Why do you think it's going to work now? It didn't work in Vietnam. It didn't work in Central America. It didn't work in the Caribbean. It didn't work in the Philippines. Why do you think it's going to work now? The arrogance was simply the answer for that. And so there's an arrogance here. I think what you're seeing in Ukraine, I don't know how anyone can divorce that from the rest of the militarism that has existed for decades. We can just make it easy. We'll call a starting point the Cold War, end of the Cold War, just to make it easy, right? But we can go further back than that. But certainly the idea that you can divorce somehow this war in Ukraine from all the other wars is just nonsensical. I don't know how the same people in charge for the Americans and the British and the Europeans were the same people in charge of the Iraq war, the Afghan war, the war in Libya. And these are the same people over and over again. They might be Republican, they might be Democrats, but what they encompass are two things. One, it's a megalomania, and so when I look at the war in Ukraine, I say this is the result of megalomania from Washington, D.C., from London, from Moscow. These are the people who have taken power and want to exert that power to benefit themselves. And if that's just for their egos, or for the idea that somehow the map needs to be in the shade of color that they want it to be, like a game of Risk, that's what they're going to do. And of course, the other thing too for Ukraine is, the commerce, the trade, particularly the energy, again, the liquid natural gas that the United States wants to sell to Europe and is now selling to Europe. So this war is an incredibly dirty war in Ukraine. It's no different than the other wars we've been involved. And I think that's something for people to see that clear connection. And it's about megalomania and about making money for profits.
I would go further. I think it's money laundering as well. I think that there's money laundering going on. Now, this is my opinion, but I think that some of the elite Democrat officials are involved with laundering their own money, including Biden, including Pelosi, including some of these people that have connections and have had them since 2014. And Victoria Nuland, it was like known to be a coup. And, many people that I talked to have said that this war didn't start February 23rd. This war started in 2014. I mean, what are your thoughts on that
absolutely. It starts before then. I mean, it really does start before then with the color revolutions and everything else. And but 2014, I think, is a day to start it, or is a date to utilize because of what occurs there, what occurs with the coup, what occurs, with how Russia responds to that coup. I don't think there's any argument you're not going to get an argument from me about what Russia does. I mean, what Russia does in 2014 response to that coup is what you would expect someone like Vladimir Putin to do. You stage a coup, you threaten his position in Ukraine, he's going to put troops into Crimea, and he's going to put troops into eastern Ukraine. And I mean, you're going to continue the idea that somehow he wasn't going to push back. This idea that somehow we were going to push him so hard that he was going to say, oh, I give up. And then we see over these last 8 years that continual pushing that finally results in the invasion of Ukraine in February of 2022. Which, yeah, exactly. If you bring up any type of context, if you bring up the fact that the war began prior to February 2022, that 15,000 people died there before that in the fighting,
Yeah.
you're
8
called a
years.
Putin sympathizer. You're called, a Kremlin shill,
Right.
just for trying to bring up the context, the nuance, the history. I mean, I dealt with this with the Afghan war, with trying to talk to people about the Afghan war, and their refusal to acknowledge that Afghanistan had been in war since the late 70s, because the war had to have started on September 11th. And the consequence of that type of framing, of allowing only that narrative, of having only that historical understanding, was the ruin of Afghanistan over these last 20 years, the deaths of hundreds of thousands of people, and then, of course, now, as we see, Taliban control once again in Afghanistan, because for many reasons of ego and megalomania, again, the United States did what it did in Afghanistan for not just 20 years, but goes back really to the late 70s.